The Egyptian Antiquities Authorities were scheduled to open, and we've spoken about this before, a sealed door under the Great Pyramid of Giza. Some researchers believe that behind these doors lies an archive of the founders of the civilization that created the Sphinx and built the monuments of Egypt. To this date, they still remain unopened. Robert Buval, in his new book, The Secret Chamber, has attempted to answer the mysteries behind one of history's most closely guarded secrets. He's with me now. Good evening, Robert.
Good evening, James.
Now, listen, Robert, first of all, I have to say, I can't remember, because as you get older, your mind seems to get worse and worse. I was talking to, who was we interviewing the other day? When I was up in Bradford, those two guys who've written this new book, who say
Bob Lomas.
Yeah. He says that it was the Scots, anyway, who invented the building of the pyramids.
Yes, I know Bob Lomas quite well. Frankly, I mean, I find the idea rather odd, but he does have some evidence to suggest that there was a type of megalithic measurement which might have been exported to Egypt. Whether this proves or shows that the Scots somehow got involved with the design of the pyramid is something else altogether. To be honest, I'm not very convinced at all. But it's the thing with the Pyramid of Egypt is that it attracts as many theories as there are authors, and I've been involved with the Great Pyramid for over 20 years.
Now, you were brought up in Egypt, weren't you?
I have.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I mean, so you've lived with the pyramids and everything else.
Indeed I have, yes.
And I think perceived wisdom has changed about what the pyramids were when they were built. Everything has changed quite a lot in the last 50 years or so, hasn't it?
Indeed.
What do we believe now, then?
Well, perhaps it's important to say what was believed for a long time.
Yeah.
Since Egyptology became a science in the 1820s, the dominant belief among scholars is that the pyramids were tombs, and just that. Gigantic tombs, but nonetheless tombs. This theory doesn't hold so well these days. There is mounting evidence that they served multiple functions, and therefore, if they're tombs, they're certainly not tombs only. The general belief, and I'm part of that new movement, is that they had a function, a religious function, probably related to the death of the king, but that some rituals were performed within the pyramids, outside the pyramids, and around the pyramids. And these rituals had to do with the belief that the kings of Egypt were to take a journey after death and travel to the sky and become part of the gods. So it is through this function that we have to explain the pyramid.
Now, do you subscribe to any of the views, and any of the people who've written many books now, about some kind of extraterrestrial link with the pyramids?
The short of the answer is no. I mean, the idea came in the early days of this kind of investigation, 1967. The proponent of this theory is the famous Swiss-German author called Eric von Daniken.
That's right.
Who wrote Chariot of the Gods. I've actually met Eric von Daniken several times.
But I haven't. He's a strange, unusual man, but unfortunately got caught fabricating some of the evidence, didn't he?
You know, I've met Eric myself the first time in '93. And like you, I find him a rather unusual man, but more down to earth than I expected. He himself told me something which is quite true. When he wrote Chariot of the Gods, he was in his middle 20s, I think. And at the time he was working as a manager for an hotel in the food and beverage section. And really, he at the time didn't expect his book to become such an enormous bestseller and being translated in God knows how many languages. So, you know, he plodded along happily and produced this manuscript, and there it was published. With every new idea that's put on paper, you're bound to make some errors. And I think it was grossly misinterpreted, in my view, that he fudged the information. that's the name of the game. I've lived it for over 15 years now since I published my own theories, and believe me, I've heard it all. So I think one has to be a bit generous with people
Right.
and accept that errors are made.
Okay, I'm looking through the hardback cover of your book that you've just given me, because in the paperback there aren't these photographs. And there's some amazing photographs here, particularly of you inside one of the pyramids. Now, I've never been to see the pyramids. I've never been there at all. I've certainly never been inside them. What is it actually like when you go in? I mean, and not to the touristy places, but when you go in some of the places that you've been allowed to go in these pyramids, what's the atmosphere like?
Very spooky. The most impressive pyramid, of course, is the so-called Great Pyramid. It's the largest in the world. It has a very, very bizarre internal system. Indeed, it's the only pyramid in Egypt and around the world, actually, that has a whole series of corridors and chambers and galleries within the core of the pyramid. Most of the other pyramids have underground chambers, but this one is full of these strange chambers inside. The places that normally tourists cannot go is one of the places, the so-called subterranean chamber. And you enter the pyramid from the northern face, and you descend seemingly forever into a very, very narrow tunnel. You have to crouch to go down, and it's approximately 600 feet below ground. And you emerge into a very, very bizarre place. It literally feels like hell. It gives you the impression that you're in the bowels of the earth. And no one knows really what this chamber's purpose was. I mean,
what is in there? Anything in there? Or?
Well, it's very roughly cut. They obviously intended to have had a few platforms. One looks a bit like a sort of throne, a large seat. And then there is a bizarre well in the center of the chamber. It's just a feeling that you get that you're in some sort of place where something odd happens. It defies logic. Then, as
some sort of execution chamber, or?
No, I don't think so.
No?
But certainly rituals, and very strange rituals they might have been. Like I said earlier, they obviously had to do with the rebirth of the king. And there are many clues as to what they might have done there in texts that are known as the pyramid texts. These give the indication that the rituals involved had to do with probably taking the mummy of the king, the corpse of the king, and performing rituals that ultimately they believed would transfer the soul of the king to the stars. So God knows what they did there, but you get this eerie feeling, you get this sort of goose pimples, and
there was nothing, no evidence of anything, no bones, nothing at all to.
The funny thing about the Great Pyramid, and indeed all the pyramids at Giza, is that they're totally bare. Nothing has ever been found in them at all. The other weird thing is that they do not contain any inscriptions, and hence all the theories that are developed, simply because we strangely know very little about them from the people who build them. So it's one of those great mysteries that the largest monuments, these universally known monuments, are totally empty, or seemingly empty. I mean,
do you think there's anything within the? We'll get on to the point of the book, the secret chamber, in a bit. But I mean, in all of these pyramids, and you've been in all of them, I think.
I have.
Is there any one? I mean, is it? Do you think like a folly that was built by somebody for no real reason, and they built all these wonderful things with marvelous chambers, but they had no real idea of what they were going to use them for anyway?
No, this is very unlikely. If you see the pyramids, it's pretty clear that these people had a very, very definite objective in mind.
Do you think there were other pyramids that were used, and for some reason they've disappeared, or?
Oh, yes. I mean, the pyramids are still being found in Egypt. I mean, hardly a few years ago, some pyramids were discovered buried under the sand. Small ones, but nonetheless pyramids. So, there might still be some pyramids covered by sand.
Is there any chance that there are chambers and places within the Great Pyramids now that have not yet been discovered?
Very much so. Perhaps I should give a bit of the background to this. The pyramid has been explored from bottom to top and from top to bottom since since antiquities. The first people to explore the pyramid were the Arabs. They went treasure hunting, if you like, and they busted into the pyramid in the 9th century. The pyramid was closed from its main entrance by huge granite plugs. You just couldn't get in. The only place you could enter is the subterranean chamber, which I explained earlier. We know that the Romans went in. But beyond that, in the upper parts of the pyramid, this was closed. The Arabs, by sheer luck, they used battering rams and pickaxes and whatnot, and by sheer luck, cut into what we call the ascending corridor. And they scrambled within the interior of the pyramids, and as far as we can make out from the records, they found absolutely nothing. All they found, which is still there, is in the so-called King's Chamber, that's at the very heart of the pyramid, an empty coffer. Now, the Egyptologists jumped to the conclusion that this is a coffin, but it might not have been. It might have been a ritualistic coffin, so hence the debate over whether it served the function of a burial or not. From then on, many people explored the pyramids, and in modern times, the pyramid has been explored mostly, surprisingly, by English people, or Scots, since we're on the subject. In fact, the most prolific exploration was conducted by the Astronomer Royal of Scotland, a gentleman called Piazzi Smythe, who, in fact, put forward many theories himself. He's the one who in fact, kicked off this idea that the pyramid was a kind of prophetic machine linked to the Bible, which, of course, is heavily discounted by scholars.
But there is no doubt, though, that the early Egyptians knew more about the heavens and more about stars and planets and things than we did. I mean, it's just now beginning to be recognized as a fact that there are more planets than we could see with the naked eye or with our telescopes.
Yeah, well, the Egyptians were avid observers of the skies, and certainly those who built the pyramids. For the very simple reason that the pyramids, and particularly the Great Pyramid, is aligned to the astronomical directions with incredible precision. The papers were full of it, by the way, today. I don't know if you've noticed.
I know.
Where an Egyptologist, Kate Spence, put forward a rather interesting theory as to how they might have aligned the Great Pyramid and other pyramids. She established that they might have...
Hang on, just before you tell us that, we're going to take a short break and we'll come back, Robert. In England, you were brought up in Egypt, weren't you?
I was born in Egypt and brought up in Egypt, yes.
Now, let's listen. There have been stories today, you're absolutely right, in the papers, where an Egyptologist from... she wasn't from Scotland, was she? No.
No, Cambridge.
Has come up with a new idea as to why they were there and how they're aligned. You tell us about it.
Yes, well, her idea is in fact not very new. She used a phenomena we call the precession of the equinoxes. And before you switch off, let me make it as simple as possible. Most of us from our school days know very well that the planet on which we live has two motions. One is that it rotates on its, revolves on its axis, and we get the effects of night and day. And the other is, of course, the revolution of the planet around the sun, and we get the effects of the seasons in 365 days. What most people don't know is that this planet that we're on wobbles, and wobbles very slowly, in cycles of 26,000 years. And this is called the precession of the equinoxes. And because of this wobble, the position of stars appear to change over time. In fact, it isn't the stars that change, it is our own motion that gives us this impression.
Does that have any effect, do you think, on our climate change or anything else? So there's wobble.
It's part of the complex mechanism of changes in climate, but over long periods. I mean, there is various theories that the precession is part, not entirely, but it's part of ice ages, for example.
Well, I've spoken, it wasn't you, but I've spoken to someone who wrote a book saying that, calling this the ice planet, I think the book was called The Ice Planet, and saying that this is a planet that is primarily of ice and snow.
Indeed.
And we're living just in between an ice age.
Indeed. And what happens is that because of this precession, and various other factors, but the precession causes slowly. The wobble causes, because it wobbles, it's a bit like having your car wheel out of alignment. And eventually, if you don't put it right, it's going to shake so much that it's going to rattle your engine.
Do we know how close to one sort of 26,000 year cycle we are, whether we're in the middle or coming up to the end of it or whatever?
Well, it's a perpetual cycle.
It's a perpetual, so
it depends when you start it. But as far as the ice ages, according to a lot of people, we're due for one pretty soon.
Well, and apparently, the interesting thing, I was talking about this the other day, Robert, is that apparently, before an ice age happens, the planet warms up.
Yes.
It needs to warm up to actually
cause the ice to melt.
And then it freezes over and whatever,
there is even more radical theories related to ice ages, that the wobble, as part of the factors, causes the Earth, the crust of the ice to finally give, and used chunks fall into the sea. And
which we've got at the moment, of course.
Indeed, and there's already some signs of something like this happening, and then there is an enormous increase in sea level that infringes on the coastline. So all these, but we're talking about processes that take a long time, and we
don't frighten anybody.
We just go in rush and build a shelter.
Maybe a pyramid was built to avoid an ice age that they thought was coming.
No, there is many theories about, like I said, about why the pyramids were built, and among them the Scots, as we heard before. One has to stay within the context that we're dealing with. And there is no doubt in my mind, and this goes in line with the established academic view, that the pyramids were built by pharaohs in order to service a religious function. We have all the evidence to support this. There are religious texts that speak of these beliefs and so forth. And let me return a bit to this idea that Kate Spence, for example, discussed in the newspapers today. The pyramid texts are rather clear, if one is able to interpret them, that the destination of kings in their afterlife was to do with the stars. And they specifically give us certain directions to look at. They speak a lot about the stars of Orion, for example, where they believe that Orion was the home of their god of resurrection, called Osiris. And it is in this region of the sky that they believe that the kings, after they died, their souls somehow would travel to these stars. The other region, which now comes to Kate Spence, is the northern region of the sky, the region we call the circumpolar region. Now, most people would know that this region is where the so-called pole star or celestial pole is. Now, this is clear in the pyramid texts. And strangely enough, and unsurprisingly, the pyramid is predominantly aligned to those two directions, north and south, with an incredible degree of precision. Now, it's been known since the middle 60s, since 1964, that certain passageways within the pyramid, they used to be known as air shafts. In fact, we call them star shafts now. Within the Great Pyramid, and emanating from the two internal chambers. There's two chambers, the so-called Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber. Emanating from these chambers, from each chamber, are two shafts. And they pierce the pyramid, two sets pierce the pyramid. The ones in the so-called Queen's Chamber do not pierce the pyramid, nonetheless appear to shoot out like gun barrels, if you like, towards the stars. Now, in 1964, it was determined by some astronomers and an Egyptologist, very much like Kate Spence has, that the southern shaft emanating from the King's Chamber pointed to Orion's belt. This is three stars that are very, very bright, and are very visible, one of the brightest constellations in the sky, especially at this time of year. You can see them if you're willing to go out in this cold, and they'll appear in the southern sky. Now, this is interesting, because we knew from the text that the king objective was to fly, or his soul to fly to those stars and settle there in his afterlife. The other shafts have destinations to stars and similar ritualistic stars. The ones in the north seem to point to the celestial pole, and particularly to one star which I showed in the early 90s, to be one star called Kochab, which is in the Small Bear. It is this star that Kate Spence has used to argue her case in terms of the alignments of the pyramids. And she cleverly noticed that the star reaches its upper culmination in due north when it is directly above another star which also does the same in the lower parts of the vertical line. So she assumed that they might have aimed at this two stars at the same time. And if she's right, she's broken into a very interesting code here. But let me return to the southern shafts, which I find more interesting in terms of the function of the pyramid. Following this investigation done in '64, I got rather interested as to why they were so specifically aligned to these stars. And I was intrigued by something about the pyramid themselves on the ground. There are 3 pyramids at Giza, as most people know, 2 very large ones, and another one which is much smaller than the other 2. The 2 large ones seem to be aligned along their diagonal line, going southwest. The third one is strangely offset from this line, so you get this strange map on the ground. It's a bit of a weird coincidence, but I focused on this strange layout of the pyramids, and one night I happened to be with a friend of mine in the desert. I was living in Saudi Arabia at the time, working as an engineer, and this friend of mine was talking about this constellation. He was a navigator, and he mentioned that you could use these 3 stars and push a line downwards and locate another bright star, which was used by navigator, the star Sirius. And then he said that, in fact, the 3 stars were not in perfect alignment, that the third one, which was much smaller, was offset. And it hit me that the pattern of these 3 stars were exactly the same as the pattern of the 3 pyramids. And this became known as the Orion correlation theory. I eventually published this in a book form, which, incidentally, if you remember, you interviewed me.
I do. And listen, hang on there for a moment. We must take one. Now, we've got Graham Hancock coming in, and you're going to come in with him, actually.
Yes, I hope to come with him when you have him, I think, in a week or so. And I'd like to tell the viewers who may have been following the enormous debate concerning the Horizon programs that were broadcasted last year, to get in touch with Graham Hancock through his website, www.grahamhancock@virgin.net. You'll find all the latest news there. It's very interesting.
Because they're going to rebroadcast the Horizon program in the future.
Indeed.
With some adjustments that you have insisted that they make on it.
Well, the Broadcasting Standard Commission has insisted.
Well, exactly, yeah. Because you weren't happy with what they said. Listen, because we'll be out of time before long, and you're going to come back in again. Let's get to the secret chamber. There have been many people who wanted to talk about this secret chamber, whether it's under the Sphinx, whether it's in wherever it is. The Egyptian authorities won't allow anyone to have a license to investigate. Lots of cynics, myself included, think that probably they've been in there and nicked all the stuff, or somebody. I mean, surely somebody's been in there.
Who knows?
Is it really as important?
Oh, yes, indeed.
And how could you get such a large book about it when so far nobody's been in there?
Well, my book investigates the 2 things. One is whether there is historical evidence to suggest the existence of such a chamber, and I go into great detail in the first part. And I conclude that there is. The Egyptians, speaking in their texts, are very, very adamant that there is a chamber somewhere at Giza We know, for example, one of the most interesting part of evidence, I've seen it myself, is in a papyrus kept at the Berlin Museum. It's known as the Westgar papyrus. And in this papyrus, there's a very strange story narrated by the scribe, speaking of the time when the pyramid was being built. And it talks about a magician visiting the court of the king. And the king inquires where the secret chamber of the god Thoth. Now, the god Thoth was regarded by the Egyptian as having brought down the wisdom of the gods and invented writing and inscribed this wisdom on tablets or in books and concealed them in a secret chamber. And it seems from the papyrus that the king who built the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, wanted to have the contents of this chamber in order that he could put them somewhere, either in the pyramid or somewhere near the pyramid. Now, Egyptologists dismiss this as sort of ancient science fiction, but I don't. The Egyptians particularly Egyptians who build the pyramids, keep on surprising us. Every time we think there is a myth, it turns out to be reality. They've spoken about the stars, and there you go, we realize that the pyramids are aligned to stars and specific stars. They speak about Egypt being in the image of the sky, and there you go, we find that Egypt and the pyramids are a pattern of the sky, as I've explained earlier, and so forth. And why not this chamber? Now, there is much reason to believe, from scientific investigation, we're not talking now about textual speculation, that there is a possible chamber within the Great Pyramid.
And you see, I haven't been there, and I just assumed that surely these have been found. Surely every inch of these pyramids must have been looked at by now.
Actually, not. We've looked at all the internal system, but the internal system comprised something like perhaps 5 or 6% of the volume of the pyramid. It has been calculated that if the Egyptians wanted, they could have placed hundreds of chambers inside the pyramid, and we still wouldn't know about them. There is enough volume in this pyramid to put hundreds of chambers. Now, the place most likely to have a chamber was explored in 1993 and by a German engineer called Rudolf Ganzbrick. As a matter of fact, for those interested, Rudolf Ganzbrick was at my home a few days ago, and we were talking about all this all over again. I've been very much involved with this event since its early days. What happened is that Rudolf Ganzbrick decided that he would explore the so-called shafts inside the Queen's Chamber. Now, there's a very strange background to these shafts. They were not known to exist before 1872, and the reason is that they did not penetrate within the chamber. They were discovered by an English engineer,
of course,
from Newcastle, let's be precise, so not very far from Scotland. And
but he's English.
Yeah, but he is English, yeah.
Yes, in 1872, a fellow called Wayman Dixon. And but since then, the Egyptologists were convinced that these particular shafts were abandoned, that they served no purpose whatsoever. Rudolf Ganzbrick didn't think so, and surprisingly, in parallel with him, and I didn't know him at the time, I didn't think so either. Me for different reasons, because I had found that they were aligned to stars and all the reasons that they had a function. In any case, he explored these shafts in March 1993 with a miniature robot, and he demonstrated first that the shafts were much longer than had been assumed. The one he explored, the southern shaft, goes about 60 meters into the core of the pyramid. They were previously thought to go just a few meters. But more interestingly, at the end of the shaft, he came across a door, complete with two handles. Now
these shafts are the size of what?
The size of a little window, if you like.
Okay. Not big enough to crawl in.
No, and hence why they were never explored.
Okay.
The only way we can get through them is using...
These sort of little robots they use in the pipes. They call them ferrets.
I don't know what they call them, but his looks like a sort of miniature tank.
Yeah, okay. So he sent it up. He sent it up through the.
Sent it up there, and he actually filmed what the robot saw, and what came through this film. It's an amazing sight. The machine ended up at the end of this shaft, and what was seen, and in fact it was broadcast several times on television, was a small slab. It looks like a sliding door. complete with two little handles, two copper handles. Everything implies to me and to him that this is something that can be lifted upwards, and if it can, then there must be something behind it. He is utterly convinced now, and he's writing a book about this, by the way. A lot of people should be interested in that, where he will reveal his findings that there is definitely a chamber behind this.
Has he opened this door yet?
No, I can quite assure you that he has not. And
can you get permission to do? How do you get permission? I mean, you're Egyptian.
Oh, me, they'll never give me permission.
They won't give you permission.
Oh no, I'm the black sheep of the family in this one, because I'm the one who broke the news of this door to the British press.
But the Egyptians don't like that.
They didn't like that at all.
The Egyptians want to keep everything. It seems, and I don't know, maybe I'm unfair, but it seems the Egyptians do not want any more known about the pyramids than is already known. They want them left there as they are, as tourist attractions, but they really don't want anybody finding out anymore.
Well, when you say the Egyptians, let's be a bit more specific. We're dealing with the Antiquity Department, and in this particular case, we're dealing with the Directorate of the Giza Plateau. I have been in conflict with the director of the Giza Plateau for many years. It's well known. I've hit the Egyptian newspaper on the front pages several times for having criticized and attacked him. The reason I feel so strong about this matter is that this gentleman seems to be absolutely convinced that he knows it all, and because he's adamant that there is nothing to be discovered there, it's a kind of catch-22. He won't allow people because there is nothing there. And here we are with an incredible situation where a door has been found in the most mysterious of monuments.
But if I'm to believe what eventually you're saying in your book, if we actually find out this secret chamber or the Hall of Records, then it could change people's perception on the history of mankind.
I believe, yes, if such a thing exists. And like I say...
But how are you? Are you 10% sure, 80% sure?
I would say that I'm about 70% sure that there is some sort of cache or secret chamber, let's call it what you like, within the pyramid. And in fact, I would even wager that there is a similar chamber underneath the Sphinx.
I was coming back with... I can never remember Hancock's first name, you know. Graham Hancock. I will call him Herbie Hancock and then go into some music. But yeah, Graham Hancock. Robert's book is called The Secret Chamber, The Quest for the Hall of the Records. It's a fascinating book. It's got some great photographs in. Before we go to the course, I just want to... this question, which fascinates me anyway. Why does everybody... Well, not everybody, but lots of people think if this Hall of Records is found, then we're going to know something about the second coming of Christ.
Well, let me be very brutal here. I don't believe that we're going to know anything about the second coming of Christ or anybody's second coming. However, the reason that a lot of people believe that is mainly to do with one, like I said earlier, the biblical theories of Piazzi Smythe, who associated the pyramid as being a biblical prophetic machine, ensured that every dimension sort of speaks of a prophecy. And he concluded, among other things, that the final objective of this pyramid is to predict the second coming of Christ. He had a huge following, believe it or not. I mean, there was an enormous movement at the time in the 1860s. Later on, much closer to us, this idea was put forward by an American psychic called Edgar Cayce. And again, Cayce has, although he died in 1945, made a prediction that a chamber would be found under the Sphinx, and that in this chamber would be found these records, and that these records have something to do with the second coming of Christ. So there you are. These are the sort of reasons why there's such a following. But
you don't believe it?
No, I don't. I mean, but it's interesting to follow the phenomena, if you like. Okay. And hence, I discussed this quite a lot in my book.
Right, let's take some calls. Put your headphones on. Disappear there. Phil is in Crowborough. If you want to join us, 08700 40 50 60. We take the calls now. Phil, you're on the air. Hi. Hello, Phil.
What you're saying about...
hang on, Phil. For some strange reason, we're getting the calls coming in halfway through, Ash. Can you check that out? Yeah. Okay, Phil.
Right. About 30 years ago, I bought a box of old books, and one of them is Travels of Upper and Lower Egypt, the division of the French army during the campaign of General Bonaparte, by Vivant Daignon, 1803. And I find it very interesting because there's all pull-out maps of the hieroglyphics and the tombs. Have you read the book yourself?
I have seen it, yes. You're speaking of Vivant Daignon, who was the artist who accompanied Bonaparte on his on the expedition. In fact, on his return to France, Vivant Daignon published an enormous work called Description de l'Égypte, which has become a sort of bestseller in its days. And in this Description de l'Égypte, there are wonderful, wonderful plates. And
they are here, yes, I'm looking at them now. What I was interested in is, it's written in English, but there seems to be an F. The whole plane sparkled, but it's got an F instead of an S.
Come again?
What I'm interested in, it's written in English,
yes,
but it's got here, like in one of the pages, the whole plane, instead of sparkled with arms, it's got FP, sparkled or something. Everything seems to have got an F.
Yeah. Well,
I can't understand that.
Yes, no, it's the way that they used to type in those days.
It's so interesting because the
not a mystery, no.
So it's like the Antiques Roadshow. What you want to know next, Phil, is how much is the book worth?
Oh no, I've had it for 30 years.
Listen, if it's worth a few £1,000s, it might be worth selling it, but I don't think it is.
No,
unless you want to donate it to me, I'll accept it with pleasure.
Well, what I was interested in is when I was watching the television of the pyramids in Egypt, they look so different on these pull-out kind of maps. So obviously that they deteriorated, haven't they?
Yes, and when Napoleon got there, the pyramids, the larger part of the lower part of the pyramids was buried in sand. Hence why they look so different today. All this has been cleared. And then, since then, by the way, the pyramids have been battered, if you like, by explorers. Again, coming to a...
Most of them from this country,
Most of them from this country. There was a very famous or infamous Colonel Howard Weiss, a military man who, for some reason, went to explore the pyramids and used gunpowder to blast his way through. So, hence the damage on the Great Pyramid, unfortunately.
No wonder the Egyptians don't really want us going kicking around anymore, you know.
I think you'll have a hard time going through customs with gunpowder these days, but...
Okay, thank you, Phil. Let's go to Russell in Aberdeen. Yeah, Russell, you're on the air.
Hi, just wanted to ask Robert, could you give me a date, roughly, for when the first pyramids in Egypt were erected?
Why? Yes, we're talking about the Third Dynasty pyramids. And the very, very first pyramid that seems to have been erected is the so-called Pyramid of Zoser in Saqqara. The date that is generally accepted is about 2700 BC, but some think it's a bit earlier, about 2650 or so. So that's the kind of dates we have for this pyramid.
Long time ago, Russell, really, I would have said. Wayne in London, you're on the air. Hi, Wayne.
Hello, James. How you doing?
Yeah, good, Wayne.
Well, I am a stonemason, a marble and stonemason, and in my trade, I studied. I had to study my history through like early man when he kind of.
Yeah, get to the point, Wayne.
Right. Egyptology. Egyptology is based on what we know from the...
Do you have a question for Robert, Wayne, or are you just going to sort of prattle on like this for half an hour?
No, my question is that the pyramids weren't built by the Egyptians. They were built by a pre-existing empire.
Well, there's been that theory, and I am not an advocate of that one, but it's still open for debate. The pyramids to me seem... I mean, I've seen them so many times, and I've explored them so many times, and... one cannot escape the conclusion that they were built by Egyptians. The big question is when, and this is more interesting to me. And they may have been built in an epoch, or at least started in an epoch, which is before, i.e., the so-called Egyptian civilization. So these are big questions that are being debated and particularly discussed in books written by my co-author Graham Hancock. But I think it's clear to me, and I'm sorry to disappoint a lot of people on this one, that it is the native people of Egypt who built this pyramid. Now,
I don't dispute that. I'm not disputing that. Sorry, I don't dispute the Egyptians built the pyramids as we understand the Egyptians, like North Africans. It wasn't called Africa then. But the people that actually built the pyramids were not the same people who built the Sphinx.
Okay, I can see your question. Well,
I can't. What is this sort of? I mean, they weren't at round about the same time, but they were for different reasons, weren't they?
I think what is being put to question here is that there has been a theory proposed by an American researcher, a very good friend of mine, John West, who argued that the erosion on the Sphinx indicates that it is much older than the pyramids, and therefore that it was built by some earlier civilization which has been lost and that we haven't yet detected. This is an interesting theory because, as you may or may not know from my work, that I've concluded the same with Graham Hancock using astronomy. So there are two sciences that strongly suggest that the Sphinx may be far older than we think, and therefore raises a huge question because the date that we propose is before the Egyptian civilization.
Okay. Wayne, thank you very much indeed. We've got to take a little news break. I know Chamber is... you've missed the whole interview, really, because we're nearly at the end. The Secret Chamber, The Quest for the Hall of Records, which is Robert Buval's latest book. And nobody's asked the question, so I'm going to ask the question, really. What do you expect to find in this chamber? What do you expect to find behind that door? When and if you ever find it?
Yeah. Well, let's be optimistic. There has been lately rumors, unfortunately rumors, but nonetheless coming from good sources, that the Egyptians will attempt an opening of the door in 2001.
Why all this build-up to it? Is this to improve the tourism or what? What do you think?
Perhaps partly because I think mainly is that the thing has become such a hot potato that nobody wants to take the decision in case things go wrong or it's a flop. You know, it's one of those things that catch-22, don't open it and let's not find out, or try and open it and perhaps something goes wrong. But I think the pressure is mounting and they'll have to open it sooner or later. I think 2001 seems likely. What's going to be behind it? Well, according to some ideas that I've put forward, and more importantly, the latest ideas that Rudolf Gantenbrink, the discoverer, has put forward, is that the entrance, the main part of the shaft is not the lower part leading to the chamber of the Queen that we know, but in fact the upper part. That this was somehow a place of starting. We both expect that some sort of chamber, fairly large, probably the same size as the Queen's chamber, will be there. Now, my guess, like I said, is that it will contain, among other things, hopefully tablets, which are the so-called writings of thought. I've explained earlier in the interview that this is what seems the most likely find. But nothing prevents the possibility of a sort of Tutankhamun type of discovery. Nothing from the king who built this pyramid has ever been found.
So you think it possibly could be the king who built this pyramid?
If it is, we're in for the biggest find in history, which will completely overshadow the Tutankhamun find, because we're dealing with one of the most prominent and powerful king of Egypt.
Did you ever look on the face of Tutankhamun?
Did I ever look at the face
of the mummy, or no?
Oh yes, indeed. Yeah.
Because apparently if bad things happen to you, curse when you do that.
You know, I'm still alive, and many people have looked at his face are still alive.
But there were stories of all sorts of people who did the guy, discovered him, the bloke who brought him out. They all had mysterious deaths and everything else.
You know, I mean, we all die sooner or later, and it's one of those things that it happened that many of them were on their way. But for example, Howard Carter, who was the discoverer of the tomb, lived to a ripe old age. So, you know, if anybody should have gone with the curse, it should have been him.
Okay. Steve in Liverpool, you're on the air. Hi, Steve.
Hi. Thanks, James. Hi, Rob. The thing was, I was just going to ask, actually, the question about what do you expect to find. But were you part of a team that did, like a seismologist and a astronomer who did some research regarding the tomb or chamber underneath the Sphinx?
Yeah, in fact, it was an American team. I wasn't part of it. There was 2 explorations. The very first one took place in '93, and it was John West and the Bostonian geologist Robert Schoch. They went, in fact, to examine the weathering of the Sphinx, as I said earlier. But while they were doing that, they used seismograph, and they feel very strongly that they've detected a possible chamber under the front paws of the Sphinx.
That's it, yeah.
Now, in 1996, another team came over. Again, a bunch of Americans, led by a gentleman called Robert Joseph Shore. And since we're talking about, since the big focus is on Florida these days and the American elections, this team comes from the Florida University. And they used radars, not seismographic equipment, and they detected a large cavity underneath the rump of the Sphinx.
Right.
And they feel that there is a tunnel leading away from that cavity to the back of the Sphinx, some 200 yards, and may be connected to a large tomb underground that has been discovered very recently. So all this is on the burner, and we got this bizarre catch-22 situation where the Egyptians say, well, prove to us that there is a chamber under the Sphinx, and we'll allow you to open it. And these guys say, okay, we've shown you the evidence with the radars, and the Egyptians say, no, because we can't see it, and nobody can be sure, and it goes on and on. So, I don't know what...
There's definitely a chamber there.
Well, there's definitely cavities, but the radar cannot confirm...
Just as a matter of interest, when the Sphinx originally was built, and you're saying about the weathering, because basically they thought it was an oasis, and it was weathered by water, and not the other elements. Yeah. Would it not be possible, if it was an oasis, then there may be a cavity under there that's naturally happened through erosion through water?
Well, indeed,
and not purposely built for treasures or whatever.
Yes, indeed. That's, of course, the possibility, and that's one of the reasons why the Egyptians are reluctant. Then there's something there. So, we keep saying, there's plenty of smoke, and if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, there must be a duck there,
Yeah, well, the other thing is Queen Nefertiti. There's, the Great Book of the Dead, scripts, from that, or hieroglyphics, were found on some pillars relating to the Book of the Dead. And apparently the messages that were on that were like thousands, or, well, let's say hundreds of years before Queen Nefertiti, saying about the great race before their race, if you know what I mean, before Nefertiti.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure which text you're referring to, but the Egyptians themselves, in many of the texts, they speak of a earlier golden age.
Yeah.
Which they refer to as the age of the gods.
That's right, yeah.
But they speak of this age not as if it's some sort of myth or legend. They seem to be speaking of it as some historical period.
Well, that's what I mean, because in the deciphered text, it says that, like, as in the, as if it was saying, as in the Book of the Dead, or in the scriptures of the great gods in the past. So there must have been something there for them to have actually written that.
I'll give you the bottom line of all this. The big question now is whether the Egyptologists who have interpreted those texts are right, or whether the ancient Egyptians themselves are right. And I'd rather go for the ancient Egyptians. They seem to be very clear as to their history, and they speak of a much earlier period, and they're very adamant about this. Now, we either dismiss this as the Egyptologists do, or we take it seriously, even though I must admit that evidence is scarce. But many things have cropped up. I come from a city. I was born in Alexandria, and if one goes on the evidence, that city never existed, because there's nothing left. And yet this city, as we know, was there, and rather a glamorous city as that. So, there we are.
Okay, we've got to move on. We only have a couple more minutes and one or two more calls. Steve, thank you very much indeed for that. Sadia is Egyptian. She's in London. She wants to talk to you now. Sadia, hi.
Hi, James. How are you?
I'm good.
You're okay?
Yeah, thank you.
مساء الخير Robert. Robert.
Yes, hello.
مساء الخير.
مساء النور.
I better speak in English, shall I?
Yeah, please.
I did climb the Great Pyramids when I was about 13. and I went with a guide. He was about 18, and he asked me to go to the chamber with him. But as you know, you're not allowed to go with the young men. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which chamber, sorry?
You know the pyramids. You want to know if there's a chamber there? There is one.
Yeah.
Sadia, turn your radio down because I can hear it in the background and it makes it very difficult.
Yeah, what I understood is that you climbed the pyramid with a guide when you were a young girl, and then what happened?
He asked me to go to the chamber, to have a look, and I said no.
Oh, he said that there was a secret chamber or something there. And
it was there.
It was there, huh?
Yeah, and it took us 20 minutes to climb up the top, and it took us 15 minutes to come down.
Well, you should have gone.
No. Well, you know how it is. I mean, young girls shouldn't go with, young men were not being seen. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
A shame you'd have made lots of money if you discovered it. Thank you, Sadia. Last call. Charlie is in Derby in the Midlands. Hi, Charlie.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi.
Right. The question I want to ask is, because I've done a lot of research in Egyptology, there's a book by Professor Martin Buval out of Africa.
Yes.
I don't know if the guy knows it.
Sorry, I haven't read it, no, but go on.
Right, but basically I just want to know about the origins of the ancient Egyptians.
You want to know about the origins of ancient
Egyptians, i.e. racial grouping.
Racial grouping of the ancient Egyptians.
This is a much discussed subject, far too complex to go through it now. But there's been suggestions that they may have come from Africa, or I mean, Egypt is in Africa, but rather from Central Africa. The most accepted suggestion is that they came from what is today Libya. So we really don't know, but from their racial type, the Egyptians are very unique in themselves. They are people that, if you go to Egypt today, and you look at the Egyptians, and then you go and wander around the tombs and you see the pictures, they amazingly are the same, and you all you have to do is dress them differently and they look the same. So I do not go for, there's been a fad lately started that the Egyptians were Negroes and so forth. There is, without being difficult one way or the other, but there is no evidence. Certainly there must have been a lot of blacks at one stage, especially in the Middle Kingdoms and the late kingdoms, because they had contact with Central Africa. But that they were predominantly from that race, I do not think so. But they were certainly mixed people.
Because the pictures that you see as well of the ancient Egyptians look very different to Arabs, don't they?
Yes, in fact,
the features are different.
There is a misunderstanding about the Egyptians themselves even today. The Egyptians are not Arabs by racial origin. They are really Nilotic people, and they do look very different from the so-called Semites, which are the Arabs.
Okay. We learn everything on the show, and there's more than enough to take in. My brain's had enough now. Robert, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
It's past my bedtime as well.
You're going to come back with Graham Hancock in the near future and talk about the program that you have going out on Horizon again, and why you complained to the Broadcasting Standards Council about what happened.
Indeed.
And thank you very much indeed. Robert's book's called The Secret Chamber, The Quest for the Hall of Records. Fascinating, and if you get the hardback copy, there's some fabulous photographs in there as well. And it is published by Arrow, I think, isn't it?
That's correct, yes.
And thank you once again for coming in.
Thank you very much, James, and see you next time.
Yep.